a country nearly inaccessible to Americans, even American journalists, for more than 5 decades. Hello, South Florida. I'm Hatsovella, and this is Cuba. During the next 2 hours, we'll take you coast to coast, where few television cameras have gone before. It took us about 2 miles to get through this wooded area. This is what Santiago de Cuba looks like on a Monday night. Just 90 miles south of Key West, but worlds apart. Local 10 is the one and only station given access to the communist island to bring you an inside view of life. We went wherever we wanted to go across the island, every province from north, south, east, and west. We explored Cuba and wanted to share those stories with you. It's Cuba like you've never seen before. Our journey begins in Havana. We've taken you to the capital city several times. This time, we wanted to venture out to see the rest of the island. We rent the van that would take us across the country on a historic trip. We meet up with Felipe, our Cuban guide, and the uncle of our producer, Michelle Lackamore. With critical planning and a limited amount of time, we head out on our coast-to-coast journey. Our special begins in Guantanamo. You may have heard the song. Well, this is the city, the town that inspired it. Like many Cuban towns, its central square attracts residents day and night. In Guantanamo, we didn't have to look for it. Frustration found us. These are the outskirts of Guantanamo.
Esta es la calle Varona.
Varona Street, neighbors say. Here, you won't see pretty colonial buildings.
Esto aquí es un brazo de mar.
These women complain about how badly it floods here. No money in the town's budget right now to fix it, she says.
Este es un tragante que la tapa se le partió.
Another woman wants us to see a sewer pipe with a broken cover. The neighbors had to resolver, as they say, and cover it with this old rusted metal sheet.
Cuando llueve es un río que nadie puede salir.
When it rains, it's like a river out here, she says. No one can leave their homes. Meanwhile, down the street, this man says he earned some cash fixing shoes. But today, the workload wasn't good. Just 2 pairs. At night, in Guantanamo's main drag, where you find lots of stores, you will also find this man. At first, you think he's just taking a break, but get closer and you'll see why he's there. He sells bags, plastic bags that you and I toss out after going to the grocery store. He relies on to make a few extra bucks. The city of Guantanamo does have tourist attractions, but typically it's overshadowed by our U.S. naval base. It's a weekday afternoon, and after driving for about 30 minutes, we go up a steep road to get to this lookout to see the famous base. But you can barely see it. Folks here in Guantanamo say this is the only spot where they can see our naval base, a point of contention for both countries for many years. For you history buffs, the history of the base goes back to the Spanish-American War, the late 1800s, when Cuba belongs to Spain. The war ends. Spain gives the U.S. control of Cuba. Cuba then becomes independent. But there's a catch. The Cubans agreed to lease the Bay of Guantanamo territory for a little more than $3,300. Now, the price is about $4 grand. For more than 50 years, Fidel Castro has refused to cash those checks. The Castros argue the territory is illegally occupied, that the young Caribbean nation then didn't have much leverage and felt obligated to lease the land. Rafael Velasquez was born and raised in a tiny town near the base called Mártires de las Fronteras. martyrs from the border.
Roce como tal no tenemos con ellos.
There's very little interaction, he says, between Cubans and Americans, but you cannot get too close. Some of the land, he says, has mines.
Es un territorio que es cubano.
It's Cuban land, he says, with lots of parks and beaches, lots of pretty things on that side. He hopes the land can eventually be given back to Cuba. Back in Guantanamo's Central Square, we see something we did not expect to see. It catches us off guard. With a cell phone camera, our producer captures this. A man carrying a small homemade sign screaming, "Cuban people, wake up." He goes on to say, the people are being lied to. And demands the government increase wages and drop prices at supermarkets. We keep rolling when this happens. A park caretaker hoses down the man, telling him to get a job. People in town told us he does this time and time again, and each time he's taken away and jailed before being released days later. This is the reality in Guantanamo, a reality that lonely protester alluded to before he was hosed down and taken away. Our next stop, the province of Santiago de Cuba. The city of Santiago is known for many things. Rico, bueno, the birthplace of rum. The birthplace of trova, a world-renowned style of Cuban music. This is what Santiago de Cuba looks like on a Monday night. Believe it or not, this happens every night, Monday through Friday. Dancing and music is a way of life here in Santiago, really in Cuba.
Es un lugar donde se baila la música cubana tradicional.
Traditional Cuban music, and the dancing doesn't stay too far behind. Santiagueros, as they're called, were getting ready for Carnaval. At night, on the streets, you see how they get ready. 3 months of practice every night.
Es lo máximo, es la vida entera para el santiaguero.
Probably the best time of the year for folks who live here, says Gabriel Lopez, who is the group's choreographer.
Viene desde nuestros ancestros y lo hemos ido cultivando y defendiendo.
It's something that dates back to our ancestors, and we have cultivated and defended this tradition, says Sonilda Nelson, the mother of one of the dancers.
Es un momento de júbilo, de participación, donde todos estamos en familia.
It's a couple days of joy where we all participate, she says, and surround ourselves with family. It's a time when other Santiagueros, natives of this province, come back home.
Nuestros hijos y nuestra generación mantengan esta raíz y esta cubanía.
These folks want to make sure their children hold on to these roots, what they call their cubanía.
Lleva mucho tiempo, pero mucho sacrificio.
This 20-year-old dancer named Leonard says it takes a lot of time and sacrifice. But in the end, it's worth it.
Gracias por hoy.
Practice ends for the night. But there's another side to Santiago's history. It is the birthplace of the country's revolution. It was here at the Cuartel Moncada, an army barracks back then, where the Castros launched an attack in 1953. The first failed attempt to topple dictator Fulgencio Batista. It was in Santiago, 6 years later, where Fidel, from this balcony, declared victory in 1959 and told his people he was not personally interested in power. 5 decades later, the Castros are still in power. And there are reminders that Santiago was a crucial battleground in Cuba's modern history. A stop for every papal visit since 1998. It was from this cathedral that Pope Francis greeted and blessed the people of Santiago during his visit. said to be the largest city in Cuba. Santiago is hilly. So hilly. The famous Padre Pico stairs are there not just for tourist pictures, but really to help the people get to the top of the hills. Truth is, just like revolution, Cubans here, or Santiagueros as they're called, remember a more recent calamity. Walk around, ask, and you'll quickly get stories, complete with dates. October 25th, 2012. Hurricane Sandy makes landfall in Santiago.
Fue una cosa desastrosa. Santiago fue devastado completamente.
Imares Rosales says it was disastrous. The town was completely devastated. Sandy came overnight. It lasted for hours. Debris on every block. Light post collapsed. Trees down.
Es como si hubiéramos tenido una guerra de 3 horas.
It felt like we had been attacked in a 3-hour war. 11 people died. They remember a good amount of homes lost their roofs. 3 years later, and residents say recovery has been astonishing.
Se sorprende ver cómo Santiago se ha recuperado tan rápido.
Those who visit are surprised to see how fast we have recovered, she says.
Todavía nos queda mucho por hacer, pero tenemos que reconocerlo, que el cambio ha sido muy bueno.
Still a long ways to go, she says, but we have to recognize recovery has been positive. Yet another instance at Santiago is on center stage of Cuban history, likely not the last time for the old port town. Coming up, a visit to the town and shrine of Cuba's patron saint. Then, to the province of Granma and a look at the ways people use an old pastime to make a few bucks. And later, a story all too familiar in the exiled community, a family separated for more than 45 years. The town of El Cobre is on the way out of Santiago. The tiny town is surrounded by mountains and copper mines, which is how it gets its name. Religious or not, it's a must-see, part of Cuban history, a destination for the faithful. By the side of the road, a man selling knickknacks tells us how to get there. As we get closer, you see people selling flowers. At these stands, you can choose from all sizes and types of wooden relics. Our Lady of Charity is probably the most honored and prayed to religious icon.
En primer lugar, tengo fe en la Virgen.
We have faith in the Virgin, says Noglis Gonzalez, who relies on that faith and on the faithful to feed his family. Thousands come to this sanctuary.
Este ha sido mi modo de sobrevivir.
This is how I survive, he says. He's been selling these small works of art since 1995. People cannot have the real icon at home. They take this instead. And on her anniversary, you can pray to her. Gonzalez pays the government a $15 license fee to run this stand. But he says they still have enough to run their household and make more icons. These guys are resourceful. When building these images, they use up old broken light bulbs to save money. In the end, it doesn't matter what they're made of. What matters is that you end up here, at this shrine, where inside you find La Virgen de la Caridad. In the early 1600s, 3 farmers found the statue floating on a small board in the waters of the Bay of Nipe. Story goes, it had the sign that said, "I am the Virgin of Charity." It was taken to the parish of El Cobre, but kept disappearing and would always be found on a slope at El Cobre, where the townspeople built a small church and eventually this basilica. It is here where Pope Francis celebrated Mass. Those who come, Cubans and foreigners alike, come with devotion. This woman carrying her days-old baby girl was there to give thanks for the good delivery.
Tremenda fe.
We have so much faith in her, she says, because she's our patron, our savior. Ask any Cuban and you'll get the same answer. The province of Granma is our next stop. As we arrive, the sun is starting to set. By day, the early morning hustle is easy to see. So much activity in the streets, and it's not even 8 a.m. And while a good amount of people walk, we notice instantly lots of them are on bicycles. So it makes sense there are spots where you can leave your bike for a minimal fee. The sign outside says, parking for bicycles. Amilcar Milanes takes care of them, estimates parking about 100 bikes a day at this home, which is also, by the way, used for a small cafeteria where they sell shakes in these Corona bottles turned glasses. It's about 9 in the morning, and you can see how many bikes he's already storing. He says he charges about 1 Cuban peso per bike. So that's about 100 pesos a day, 400 a month, the equivalent of 16 US dollars. We go back to the park where others make money a different way. These are city workers using a well to get water they use for the plants and trees around the park. That's where we find Carlos Brizuela, a lifelong topographer who was born and raised in this town, a town he loves, but has been retired 2 years now. Gets about $12 a month. That's how you live, he says, day by day. And at night, at the central square, if they're not playing soccer, kids are riding bikes. This red bike with Cuban flags on its side says, "I'm happy in my country." The man behind these bikes is Manuel Nogueras. He's been renting them for 11 years. He painted, welded another bike, and the business started growing. Now there are 8. The bikes rarely come in one piece, some broken apart, so he puts them back together and gives them a special touch. Some of these, Russian-made, can be as old as the revolution. Nogueras does this every day. Each ride costs a Cuban peso. So each month, he ends up taking home about $80 a month. That's a decent wage for Cubans. Most of it he uses to pay the bills. The rest, to keep up with the wear and tear of the bikes. Jose Mira brings his 1-year-old granddaughter, Liana. Too many limitations because of the economic situation here in Cuba, he says. We want better salaries and better living conditions. But for now, all he can do is enjoy the tender moments with Liana.
Yo todas las noches lloraba.
Coming up, the story of 2 sisters, one in Holguín, the other in South Florida, separated by politics for more than 4 decades.
Soy hija de Freddy.
And our journey turns personal for our producer, who learns about her family history. Then, we head into the province of Camagüey, where we quickly fall into a tourist trap.
Want to see more? Head over to local10.com and visit our special section. An interactive map will connect you to Cuba's 15 provinces, full of extra footage, interviews, and slideshows, exclusively on local10.com.
When you drive into Holguín, you don't have to look far to realize sugarcane is a major crop in this province. You'll see it along the way. In this province, surrounded by mountains and fertile plains. But as we leave the farm areas and head into Holguín, the city, things naturally change. It's called the City of Parks. A total of 5 in the historical center of town, and people use each one of them for all types of reasons. In the morning, mainly to lay back and relax. It's before the daily hustle starts, but later in the day, something you'll see here in America.
Es adrenalina.
For 21-year-old Jose Avesada, skateboarding is about adrenaline. But he quickly reminds us boards are hard to find. The one he has was a gift.
I used to come here when I was little.
Alejandro Cabana, who lives back here in Miami, brought back a skateboard for his cousin. Across the street, upstairs, watching it all, these three young women, who we find out were on a small break, but the break is over. Grisel Medina Gonzalez is at the front of the line, a teacher at the town's cultural center, getting these young folks ready for Carnaval, the annual street party.
Todos los días ellos están aquí todo el tiempo.
Every day they're here, she says, practicing all the time because they want to win. Holguín, one of the biggest cities in Cuba, was most recently in the spotlight.
Que tu amor traiga a todos.
The Pope was at the Loma de la Cruz, where he blessed the city. From the streets of Holguín, you can see the iconic spot up on the hill. People often climb the 400-plus steps to get to the top. Much like the legend says, a friar did with a cross on his back. When you get to the top, you can see candles and flowers, signs of promises left behind by those who came up, looking for help from above. It is in the province of Holguín where Felipe, our guide and Michelle's uncle, grew up. It was Michelle's dream to see where her mother lived as a child. In this popular Cuban song, we get directions to Marcané, Felipe's childhood home. Maria is Felipe's mother's name. We go inside. The house, like Felipe described, is tiny. He shows us a spot where his mother would tie him to the wall so he wouldn't take off.
Me iba de temprano.
I would leave the house early in the day and wouldn't return till 9 or 10 at night.
Eso de ser travieso no quitaba de que yo fuera con ella bueno.
Felipe breaks down, tells me he was good to his mother.
Todo el dinero que buscaba, se lo daba a ella.
All the money I made, I would give to her, he says. He was about 9 or 10 years old at that point. In the kitchen, Felipe reminds us they lived here more than a decade.
Es aquí donde vivían cuando mami se fue.
Es aquí donde vivíamos cuando ella se fue.
Michelle asked if this is the home where they lived when her mother left Cuba in 1957. Felipe says yes.
Esa calle ahí vivía Herminia y Ángel.
Earlier in our trip, we stopped in Palma Soriano, where Felipe and his siblings would spend months as children.
227.
Felipe is looking for house number 251.
La casa de Diego Basto, ¿dónde era?
The two men go back and forth.
Creo que esta era la casa.
Felipe thinks this is the house he would visit as a child. Our producer, Michelle, also looking for her father's childhood home, calls her dad in Miami. Quickly, we realize the man who was simply helping us find the house knew Michelle's father and grandparents.
Soy hija de Freddy.
I'm Freddy's daughter, she tells him. We hit the jackpot. Back in Marcané, at Felipe's childhood home, he recalls this is the room where his siblings were born. A total of 9 children. A rough childhood, deep in poverty, but his loving parents made it all bearable. In Holguín, we have another mission of a personal nature. In a town 23 miles northeast of the province capital, called Rafael Freire.
Aquí nació Dani.
This is the house.
Este era el cuarto de abuela y abuelo.
Inside, we get a tour, then visit with Rina Guerrero Peña.
Nunca he visto a William en persona.
No. She tells me she has never met William in person.
Todavía un poquito, pero no.
William is William Damas, our chief photographer here at Local 10. His mother is Rina's only surviving sister. William asked us to visit the family he has never met. He wanted us to see his mom's childhood home, where she played, where she grew up. Wanted to see his relatives, especially his grandmother, 100-year-old Georgina Peña Ochoa. When we visited, her frail body was bedridden. She no longer talked, barely 8.
Sí.
William wanted us to take with us a video message.
Hola familia.
Me parece que los tengo a ellos aquí.
It's like they're here, she tells us.
Aunque no me conozcan, yo los quiero.
Even though I don't know them personally, I love them, she says, and every night I pray for them.
Es muy difícil explicar.
It's hard to explain, she says, the pain associated with 45 years of separation.
It's very emotional because it's like this family that I know, but I don't know.
Yo en realidad le he extrañado mucho a mi hermana.
I really miss my sister, and I've always wished she could come visit, she says. Idania refuses to go back to Cuba, even to see her mother.
Con dolor de mi alma, pero no podía.
I just couldn't. Even though it hurts my soul, I couldn't, she says. Idania, her husband Roberto, and their firstborn, William's older brother, left Cuba in 1970.
Yo todas las noches lloraba. Todas las noches.
She remembers crying every night. Her husband, William's father, was a political prisoner.
Yo nunca los he abandonado.
Idania has never abandoned her Cuban family, most recently sending medicine and food for her mother. The day after leaving Holguín, we run into a monster storm, followed by lightning that strikes just a few feet ahead of us, followed by this double rainbow, then a call that William's grandmother had died the day after our visit.
Es bien fuerte haber resistido.
For a family so united and so loving, Idania says not seeing each other for 45 years has been rough. Idania did get to see the images of her dying mother we brought back. As heartbreaking as that is, one thing is certain.
En la esperanza nunca la perdemos. De un día...
Reina says they will never lose hope that one day they will see each other again. Up next, hitching a ride in Las Tunas, like any place on the island, can be challenging. Then, in Trinidad, meet a retiree who scrapes by on her pension. Plus, a stop in Bennystown, the city of Cienfuegos, when we return. We're on the road again, headed to our next stop, the province of Las Tunas, where life is slow. Just ask this man, a hat maker, who sells his goods by the side of the highway, in a tiny town called El Yunque, some 18 miles from the province capital. Demendo is his name. This 35-year-old says his father and grandfather made hats. It's a tradition here. First, you carefully knit the straps, then you sew it all up. Takes about half an hour to make. It's enough to get by. Whatever way you look at it, you have to get by. We drive into town. Sun is out, but menacing clouds await our arrival. We see some people walking the streets, others sitting on benches, thinking, and maybe even watching those storm clouds roll in. But this changes everything. We, along with the folks at the park, take refuge. Some barely take cover. So when the rain moves on, Las Tunas becomes a ghost town. And we move on. On our way out, we pass this yellow truck and realize people are inside. You'll find them throughout the island. Just one way Cubans get around. Most of them have been altered, so passengers can get on and off. In every town you'll find this, a transportation hub, a terminal is what they call it. Here you'll see different options for folks trying to get around. Horse-drawn carriages are still an option. A good number of people ride their bikes. The state does run official bus lines. Then there are people's cars.
Trabajadores por cuenta propia del transporte.
This driver reminds us it's a privately run business, boteros as they're called. He and his colleagues don't want to say much more, but they're there to make money. And so are these guys, trying to sell snacks or drinks to passengers who are getting ready to leave, or those just arriving. You can see Cubans have to be resourceful every day in how they get around. We head to the province of Camagüey, where right away as we get into town, we run into a bit of a challenge. Out of all the towns we visited, Camagüey seems to be one of the toughest to get around. Even when we ask residents, they struggle to give us directions. That's unless you're this guy, red shirt, shorts, on his bike, who minutes earlier approached our van and offered to get us to our destination. Feeling lost, we agreed, hoping he would take us to the place we're staying. We drove and drove. We finally get there. He introduces us to this guy who is supposed to be our contact. He even identifies himself as Odelto, the man we're looking for. Our producer Michelle quickly discovers this is all a setup, and this is not the man we're looking for, but someone posing as him to get the business. He explains this is his job. He guides tourists into town, whether it's a hotel or a restaurant. Likely, he had an agreement with the owner of this home. A job, he says, that's legal and helps you make ends meet on a daily basis. He explains how it works. He waits for cars he knows are carrying tourists. They always tip you, he says. They always pay you. $20 to $25 a month is the average he says he makes doing this. A pair of pants costs the same, he says, reminding us it's not enough, but it's enough to buy food. The next morning, we head into town. Aside from its clay jars and busy boulevards, Camagüey is known for its churches. We counted 7 in the center of town. They're everywhere, and we were lucky to be there on a Sunday. Father Jose Grau welcomed us to Mass at his church, La Iglesia de la Soledad, where he's been a priest 14 years. When the city was founded, the churches were concentrated all within a third of a mile. Camagüey is truly an example of the role Catholicism has played and continues to play on the island.
Las personas tenían cierto temor de manifestar su religiosidad.
For many years, he says, people here in Cuba feared showing their religious faith, but that fear no longer exists. No way you can talk about religious changes on the island without talking about the 3 papal visits in 17 years. Pope John Paul II in 1998, Pope Benedict XVI in 2012, and earlier this year, that of Pope Francis. These 3 papal visits are inviting Cubans to something they have to build. Words from a man who has been a Catholic priest 45 years. He thinks of the circumstances and experiences surrounding him at the time when he became a priest, early 1960s, the peak of the revolution, when the church became a target of the Castros. He never thought he would see this day. Next stop, Ciego de Ávila, a primarily agricultural province, where cattle roam the ranches and crops crowd the landscape. They say it's some of the most fertile land in Cuba. It's our halfway point on our journey. In the town square, the faces are young. The music, reggaeton of course, draws us to this nondescript corner. There's a line, so you wonder what people are buying. Vismay Delis Gibert shows us his universal charger. It's one of his many tools and a profession sparked by the cell phone. Here, he's welding an antenna. Gibert says they learned little by little 6 years later, and he's still doing it. At La Clínica del Celular, a cell phone clinic, they can bring your phone back to life. When business is good, Guibert takes home $200 to $300 a month. He shows us how he's stringing along wires so thin you can barely see them on camera. It's microscopic, he says. What's not microscopic are the prices. But there's always a line, and yet another happy and satisfied customer. Next, the historic town of Trinidad and the big business of Casa Particulares. Then, a retiree shows us how she struggles to live day by day. And still ahead, a stop in Benny's town, the city of Cienfuegos. Just outside Trinidad, the province of Santi Spiritus, there's a fishing village. It's called Casilda. Humberto Ariola gets ready to take off to sea the next day. He's been fishing for more than 20 years. Now he's 41 years old. From the time I was a kid, he says. We were there as he unloaded his equipment, the tools he takes with him, really the stuff that allows him to fish, but also keeps him alive out there. The boats you see here, most of them are about 12 feet long. Usually it's about 3 to 4 men per boat, and they spend several days out in the sun fishing. It's enough to feed our families, to live, and to maintain the boat. You always have to figure out how to make that money. He shows us his boat, wants us to see how pretty it is, and tells us things are not too bad. You get tired, he says, but to live, you have to keep working. Juan Manuel Jimenez is the son of a fisherman and followed in his father's footsteps.
Yo estuve de buzo langostero en estatal durante 10 años.
Jimenez spent 10 years working for the state-run fisheries as a diver, mainly catching lobster. Now retired because of health reasons, but he's still fishing. It's what they call sports fishing, but what they catch, they sell.
Sí, se lo vendemos al Estado.
We sell it to the state, he says. Another way, another example, how the Castro government has loosened its rules when it comes to private business. Financially, it's enough to support your family. You won't get rich, he says, but it helps.
Hablando cubano, vamos escapando.
It's what Cubans call escapando, meaning they don't make much, but they're surviving despite the challenges. It's a story of Cubans, he says, who are humble and poor. From Casilda, we head into neighboring Trinidad.
Esa calle es la más mala que he visto en el pueblo.
Streets in Trinidad are pretty bad in some areas. When the sun comes up, you start to see the town's soul. Breakfast is early for us. We take in some fruit, some pressed ham and cheese sandwiches, and we finish with some scrambled eggs. And you cannot forget el cafecito. A typical daily breakfast like this is what you're served when you stay at a casa particular, a private home. It's how we found lodging throughout our trip. This time, we stayed in Jesus Calunga's house, up the street from the center of town.
Por la ubicación geográfica de mi casa y por la importancia y la apertura que daba el país.
The location of his home and the opening from the Castro government when it comes to the private business is what got Jesus involved. It was 2 years ago he started renting out an upstairs room out of his colonial centuries-old home. It's about $30 to $40 a night. For a couple extra bucks, you can get breakfast and lunch. Tourism is thriving here in Trinidad. All you have to do is look at these signs that tells you a room is for rent. Just on this block, we found 8 homes. That's just one block. The signs are everywhere, and so are the tourists. Cameras are as varied as the colors on the walls. Our hope was to keep chatting with Cubans who are directly affected by the tourism boom. Turn a corner and you'll find another type of business. Yoelsi Ramirez and other women sell handcrafted jewelry made of plants and seashells. These women pay the state a license fee, which is about $60 a month. She also has to spend money buying some of the goods. you make enough to sustain daily lives. 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. is a typical day for her.
No queremos ni sernos millonarios ni enriquecernos.
We don't want to be millionaires, she says. They just want to live a decent life. Back out on the cobblestone streets of Trinidad, their loud calls don't really bother this street dog. As they go by, Nena Box watches by her door.
Tenemos todo.
We have everything, she says, after listing all the hot spots in Trinidad. The cobblestone streets were built many years ago, one of the many attractions that drives tourists to this 500-year-old town. Nena does not live far from the center. The 75-year-old lowers the volume on the radio, keeps walking so we can chat, and she can show us what she calls home. This is as far as my home goes, she says. Behind her living room, behind half a wall, you'll find her bedroom. Her bathroom is in there. Nena is retired. She gets around 240 Cuban pesos monthly. That's around $10.
Pago la luz, pago el agua.
With that, she pays electricity, water, and saves the rest for food. It's not enough, though.
Ahí.
This is where she cooks. The kitchen is next to a little refrigerator right next to her bed. She uses a wooden rod to hang the few clothes she has. Shows us inside her refrigerator that doesn't have much, just a mango, a loaf of bread, and some frozen water. In order to survive, she has a side job. She cleans houses and runs errands for people.
Muy católica.
Muy católica.
A devout Catholic who is proud to show us images of her faith. Her favorite image, of course,
La caridad del cobre.
Our Lady of Charity, patron saint of Cuba. It's who she holds dearly. In her home's corner, she also points to the saints from the Santeria religion. Nena doesn't have any family left here in Cuba. Her only brother, seen in this picture, died. Before we go, she says,
Aquí tienen una amiga y una compañera.
here you have a friend. Then the story takes a turn. As we leave, we get some last-minute video. A younger guy who lives down the street screams at her, tells her to be careful after what she told us.
No, mira, aquí todo lo que se ha hablado es bueno.
She says to him, I've only said good things. A reminder to us that people here are still concerned about what they say. Coming up, a long-time business birthed out of necessity. Then, a closer look at the importance of remittances for Cubans.
La bahía de Cochino.
And stay tuned as we visit the historic shores of Bay of Pigs. Cross this colonial bridge to get to Santi Spiritus, the capital of the province with the same name. It's early morning. Things start to get going in the town's main square, which is a meeting point for some of its residents. It's a time of day where the sun's rays are still not oppressive. Probably a good time to get a haircut. Who better than Andres Valdez, who's been cutting hair for almost 30 years. This is family run. His brother and nephew work there. So did his father.
Mira, aquí trabajaba mi papá.
He shows us the chair he used, right next to his. Not much has changed in 3 decades, except
Hoy somos cuenta propista.
we're self-employed, he says. They can charge what they want or what the customer is willing to pay. A free market concept we take for granted here in America. They're just starting to use.
Como dice buen cubano, si se come.
Like we Cubans say, we can put food on the table. This is a way of life for Carlos Suarez, who's been doing this 30 of his 49 years at the doorway of the barbershop. Fixing and refilling used lighters is how he survives. He shows us how it's done. takes out the air pressure,
Ahora la vuelvo a llenar, ¿eh?
then refills it. And it's done. He charges 2 to 3 Cuban pesos, depending on the problem.
No, jamás me imaginé que iba a estar tanto tiempo haciendo esto.
Carlos never imagined he'd be fixing lighters this long, but he's thankful because the $4 a day he makes is what helped him raise his kids. We leave the center of town and head for what seems like the outskirts, looking for the home of Sari Cabrera. She sees our van and knows it's us.
Muchachos, y esos mismos son.
Cabrera invites us inside her home. The last 6 months have been tough for her. She's getting ready to go back to work after being unemployed for 6 months.
Me pagan un 60% de mi salario.
She tells us in Cuba, being unemployed means you get 60% of your salary. For her, that's 190 pesos a month, which is almost $8.
Este es el patio.
She shows us her backyard,
Esto lo tengo ahora de pollero.
which she says she uses to raise chickens.
¿Y han puesto huevos?
Sí, pone huevos, sí.
The eggs they lay help supplement the eggs she gets from the ration food the state hands out. Cabrera lives here with her 13-year-old daughter in this modest 2-bedroom home.
Esta es la cocina.
She shows us her kitchen.
Hay de todo, porque aquí hay de todo.
We have access to everything here, she says, but the prices are too high, given what we make for a living. Cabrera also relies on help from abroad, especially South Florida, which is where her sister, Maria Valdivia Cabrera, lives.
Cada vez que ella tiene un chancecito me manda mi dinerito, que es muy importante.
She sends me money whenever she can, she says. Maria has been in the States almost 22 years.
Económicamente, ella depende de lo que yo le mando.
Financially, she relies on me, she says. She sends medicine, clothing, shoes.
Lo más importante es la alimentación.
But food is a top priority. The challenge then becomes finding the food.
Tú no puedes comprar carne en Cuba, te llevan preso.
She reminds us Cubans cannot buy red meat. It's illegal. You can go to jail unless you're a tourist.
Si no fuera la ayuda de ella, imagínese usted.
Without her help, not sure what I would do. Sadi says it's too hard.
Debería haberlos ayudado mucho más, pero he dado hasta donde he podido.
She wishes she would help some more, but does what she can.
Y cuando hemos llegado,
it's a similar story, a similar experience for many Cubans here in South Florida. When we come back, a stop in the town Benny More helped make famous. We go in search, finally find the structure of a critical site in U.S. Cuba history. And later, the ever-growing tourist boom at Cuba's most famous beach, when Cuba Coast to Coast returns. Cienfuegos is forever honored in this Benny More song. Cienfuegos is the city I love the most, says the late Cuban master in this tribute to this town. The city remembers him just as fondly. One of the biggest attractions is More's statue. Those who visit cannot get enough. Cienfuegos is known as the Pearl of the South, known for its pretty colonial buildings. A town founded by the Spanish in the early 1800s and settled by the French. Take Paseo El Prado and you'll see them lined up along the way. The Palacio de Valle is one of the architectural jewels here. From here, you can walk to Punta Gorda, a getaway for Cubans who are looking for a little rest and relaxation. They use Cienfuegos Bay for relief, but the heat doesn't stop these guys. BC taxis, as they're called, are always on the move.
Aquí montamos todo tipo de turistas.
Here, we take all types of tourists on a ride, says Eddie Gonzalez, who has been pedaling 19 years.
Interesting.
Yes. This group is from Belgium.
Ahora se hace un poco más. Sí, ahora hay un poco más de turistas.
We're seeing a bit more tourists, typically from Italy, France, Spain, and now Americans who tip well, he says.
Me pagan sin, como decimos los cubanos, sin regatear.
There's a Cuban saying, he says, sin regatear, meaning they never haggle with what we charge and usually give you a little more. As far as U.S.-Cuba relations, he says it's about time. You're already seeing the results, says Felix, who is younger than Eddie. During high season, he says, they earn between $5 and $10 a day.
¿Y eso es suficiente para vivir la vida?
No, para vivir.
Enough to live, he says, to survive. Back in Parque Central, the main square, you'll find tourists from different countries. We were lucky because we found some Americans. They all agree and hope the changes will help the Cuban people. This group is from Denver. Some of them are teachers.
You know, we can lift the embargo and we can start hopefully having better ties.
My hope is that they are able to express themselves in the best way that they feel, and that they determine that, as opposed to the government determining how they speak.
More access for the people to information and things like the internet.
They think that'll lead to more exchange of information so people from both countries can get to know each other, and Cubans can maybe demand more of their government. Boxing is huge here.
Vamos a dar de frente a mí.
The boys start training young.
Adelante. Atrás.
Jose Alamo has been training boxers for 20 years. He's trained hundreds of young boxing talent.
En todos los eventos nacionales e internacionales, es la que nos da la medalla olímpica.
When we compete nationally and internationally, he says, boxing is what brings home the medals. He goes on to list all the championships Cuba has won, despite what he says is the lack of training materials.
No tenemos lo que es los guantes, no tenemos cabecero, no tenemos lo que es el medio.
We don't have gloves or other things needed for proper training.
Así con ese problema a veces nos presentamos bien en los torneos grandes.
Yacer Aguila, one of the well-known boxers here, says even with the lack of training materials, we continue to do well at tournaments. And with better relations with the U.S., their trainer says,
somos imbatibles, somos los mejores del mundo.
We won't be beat. We'll be the best in the world. Here in Cienfuegos at the Jose Marti Plaza, you feel the pride of the people, but you walk a couple blocks down the street and you see the struggle. Beyond the touristy spots, you'll find Cubans trying to make a living.
¿Qué haces para ganarte la vida?
Yo, boteo.
We found Yoel Lopez at a street corner. He's what you call a botero, basically a cab driver who uses his own car. When we ask him how the cabbie business is going,
Bien y mal.
Good and bad, he says.
Hace falta turismo.
We need more tourism. He does admit he has seen a spike in tourists coming to Cienfuegos. More and more, he's seeing Americans.
¿Me dan propina?
They give you tips, he says. Walks us over to show us his breadwinner.
¿Sí?
A bright orange, old 80s Russian car he bought 3 years ago. And when asked what he likes about the car,
¿Qué anda?
It runs, he says. And as soon as he's done showing off his car, he gets back to that corner, back to work to make enough to put food on the table. We ask him one last question. They're improving U.S.-Cuba relations.
Eso es pa' bien.
It's for the better, he says. Things have to get better. The province of Villa Clara, which some still remember as Las Villas, is where you'll find the city of Santa Clara. Like other Cuban cities, it has a colonial style with a central square. Except this town is buried deep in revolutionary history. Felipe takes us to a major tourist attraction, preferred by those who sympathize with the revolution. It's a monument, a memorial, a museum. Cubans know it as El Tren Blindado. Story goes, at mid-revolution and fighting, dictator Fulgencio Batista sent an armored train carrying soldiers and weapons. On December 29, 1958, guerrillas led by revolutionary Ernesto Che Guevara attacked and derailed the train. Fighting followed, but the rebels captured Batista's soldiers. Che, despised here in South Florida by Cuban exiles, is a hero to those who believe in the revolution. His tomb, also in Santa Clara, is a major attraction. But we wanted to see a hidden attraction. So we leave town and head north. We're told we can find it in a town called Sagua La Grande, in the outskirts of a tiny place called Mariana Grajales.
Eso no tiene problema.
After asking around, we get to this dirt road, but our van cannot keep going. Luckily, we meet this farmer who knows exactly what we're looking for and says he'll take us there. Our photojournalist Mario Alonso and I follow him. He says people always come here looking for the site. We keep walking on a dirt and rocky road, nothing in sight but fields. Our guide says the entrance is this way, so we keep following. Everyone around here calls it the Russian warehouse. We walk through more brush, more overgrown vegetation. A couple steps more, and we are there. It took us about 2 miles to get through this wooded area, finally find the structure that locals say belongs to the original site where the missiles were placed. This looks like a bunker or a storage facility, part of a bigger complex, part of a bigger story of when two superpowers clashed.
Shall be the policy of this nation.
In October of 1962, President Kennedy tells the world Russia is installing missiles in Cuba.
Run for the nearest shelter, but run.
13 days of terror followed what became known as the Cuban Missile Crisis. Our spy planes took photos like this one that show in this place, Sagua La Grande, a launch site was built. This is likely the warhead storage bunker. Most of the structures in this wooded area are falling apart, but if you walk around, you can find some bricks. Some of them still even have letters on them. The farmer shows us a cement stand. You can see broken bricks on top of it. You get closer, you can see red letters, but cannot make out what they once said. Inside, we find a colony of bats in a beehive. Part of the past, now close to 60 years old. Coming up,
La Bahía de Cochino.
A stop at the heart of the Bay of Pigs invasion. It was in these very same waters. We'll visit the port of Mariel, where thousands of Cubans fled in a massive exodus. And later, how hustling is part of life in one town of Pinal del Rio.
Want to see more? Head over to local10.com and visit our special section. An interactive map will connect you to Cuba's 15 provinces, full of extra footage, interviews, and slideshows, exclusively on local10.com.
Our Cuba coast-to-coast journey continues. We're making our way out of the province of Villa Clara. On the highway, we notice workers sweeping back and forth what looks like some type of grain. We found a couple of these gentlemen here on the road drying rice. They say they first dried using the heat of the sun. These guys were not afraid to share the road with fast-moving cars, trucks, and horse-drawn carriages.
Toda la mañana.
We do this every morning. Very little water, not much to eat, says this man who told us his name was Osmani. When there's work, he gets paid about $2 a day. Up the road, a different group. These guys pack up the rice and bag it. The rice then gets peeled and eventually sold. We continue on to Matanzas. When you drive into the city, there's a possibility you'll drive over a bridge. And that's why they call it the City of Bridges. About 17 bridges and a small city with a big history. It's called the Athens of Cuba because of the role it played in the country's cultural development, especially when it comes to Afro-Cuban culture. It's a neighborhood where Santeria still thrives. And El Barrio Simpson is the heart. After searching
Vamos a ver si nos podemos encontrar.
and asking, we finally found a home where a man practices the religion, as they call it. He tells us to explain the religion, we'll have to stay for days. So he doesn't go on camera, but explains it's a religion that goes back to West African slaves. They brought those spiritual traditions with them and have kept them. Arguably, Catholicism and Santeria go hand in hand.
The Santeria experience doesn't have Christian content, but it does use Christian symbols. And it has to do with the times when slaves were brought over from Africa and were baptized, but really weren't evangelized.
The Christian saints Cubans adore all have different Santeria names. But this province is known for more than its Santeria roots. The music may not give it away. From the time you arrive, you'll notice the traffic. People, mostly in bathing suits, walking the streets with one destination in mind. This scenery shows you why Varadero is one of Cuba's hottest destinations. White sands, turquoise sea, about 13 miles of uninterrupted beach. This sea of people are mostly Cuban. When we were there, it was low season. We stop at this artisan fair. You'll find anything Cuban, whether it's political or scenic.
Our father's Cuban, so we've been here many times over the years.
Suzanne Grosso was there with her mother, and mom and daughter, both Americans, have seen changes over the years in Cuba. They're hopeful, but because of history, decades of little change, a past that still drags on, she says her Cuban relatives are skeptical of the changes.
Comment from one of the family members here, I said, oh, maybe in 2 years things will be different. I'm looking forward to seeing that. And his answer was 2 years, 20 years. We'll see.
For Denis Barcelo, better relations means more tourists and more money in his pocket. A couple tents down, we find Carlos Cavadilla, who also sells trinkets for tourists. Whomever wants to come, he says, should come. It's obvious the economy in this country is in need of some cash infusion. He says that'll improve living conditions for Cubans and the country can prosper. American tourism, he says, contributes the most to the world. Cavadilla is one of the most outspoken folks we meet so far. He did not hold back, was not afraid to criticize the long-time political relationship between the U.S. and Cuba. He wonders if the Castro critics ever thought the embargo would affect those in power. The embargo, he says, only hurts the Cuban people. It's definitely not hurting Varadero. Drive a couple miles north and you cannot miss the cranes. Get up closer and you'll see the construction sites, the new hotels and resorts coming up. Stay a while and you'll start seeing tourist buses loaded with foreigners who don't mind spending cash in Varadero. In the southern part of Matanzas, there's a small town called Australia. Not much happening, but significant for a reason. Felipe, like many Cubans, knows the town's historical importance. Cubans say it was this building during the Bay of Pigs conflict that Fidel Castro used as his command center.
A pie, a caballo, en bicicleta.
In school, he learned Cubans volunteered to fight and came by foot, on horse, and even used their bicycles to get to this area. This building is a reminder of the failed U.S.-backed invasion that gave Castro a military victory and more international acclaim.
One of the moments of pride in my life.
Humberto Diaz Argüelles was there, now 73 years old. He remembers getting to the shores of Cuba overnight.
There were so many things happening in your mind that at that young age was very difficult to digest.
The Cuban immigrant was 18 years old, fighting for a free Cuba. He and other exiles signed up and were trained by the CIA in Latin American countries.
When we landed here,
he shows us how it happened and how it all went downhill fast.
It was a terrible feeling, terrible feeling.
They were outnumbered, outmanned.
Our battalion was 183.
Not enough weapons.
Everything went wrong, nothing went right.
Ammunition ran out quickly.
And the helicopters shooting at us, and the airplanes shooting at us, and the artillery shooting at us. And meanwhile, I was walking on the beach thinking, what's going to happen to my life? Why is this happening?
And worst of all, no backup.
Not one plane shot one bullet in Cuba, of the United States of America, not one.
The conflict lasted several days, a total of 104 men killed, 68 in combat.
That's you?
That's me.
He shows us a picture taken 3 days after he became a prisoner of war. He's the guy in the white shirt.
That was the place I had to be, and that was my duty to be there.
Back in Cuba, on the road to Bay of Pigs, more reminders of those who sacrificed their lives.
Now, if you keep driving along this road, you also run into monuments like this one, monuments that honor the fallen, people like this man, Ignacio Rolando Abreu.
15 kilómetros más y estamos en Playa Larga.
Felipe says another 9 miles and we're in Playa Larga, on the bay where it happened. We walk through some trees and find a rocky beach.
Lo conocido por la bahía de Cochino.
Felipe then points to the bay, tells us this is where the invading boats anchored and where exile fighters disembarked. We head farther south along the coast to find Playa Girón, where we visit Museo Girón. Tanks and planes adorn the front. Inside, we get the Cuban version of the story, complete with weapons of all shapes and sizes used during the invasion. Cubans fighting Cubans, each side defending ideals they thought would take their country to greatness. Still ahead,
Una tortura.
the port of Mariel, where Cubans recall the Exodus in 1980.
Welcome to the world of tobacco. We're going to take you inside a farm in one of the most important provinces of the island.
Plus, the latest underground obsession that keeps Cubans entertained. We drive into the province of Mayabeque.
Eminentemente agrícola, pero tiene muchas industrias.
Mainly driven by agriculture, but mostly industrial, he says. It's one of the 2 newer provinces created by the Cuban government in 2011. Its capital, San Jose de las Lajas, not too far from the city of Havana, is home to one of the distilleries of the famous Havana Club rum. As we make our way through, we stop to fill the air in our tires.
One of the issues we had this morning is that one of our tires was low on air, but you can't find air in most gas stations. So what we did is we drove by and saw this guy that says he had air, and here we are doing what we need to be doing, putting air on that tire so we can make sure that we continue our trip. These are folks that do this for their own business and make some money by providing air to folks like us.
From this point, we drive to Artemisa, a small province near Havana, also created recently. We stopped where you cannot miss endless sugarcane crops. You also cannot miss how Cubans live in this province. After driving through several neighborhoods for quite some time, we asked around and were told El Paladar del Gordo was the place to eat. Paladar is the name Cubans use to talk about restaurants they run from their homes. For this family, this is their pride. A hut with 2 tables and a bar, soaked by the pouring rain that easily snuck through its roof, made of palm branches. We had not been there 5 minutes, and a thunderstorm forced us to take cover. Our photojournalist Mario Alonso asked if they've lost power. They say yes, laugh about it, and continue cooking. They keep molding the mix to make the croquetas, some ready to be served. Our guide Felipe and our producer Michelle watch as the rain keeps coming. The downpour continues, and so do they. With the help from a small battery-operated lamp, they're thankful their gas stove still works. When the lightning and thunder stops, we'll get power back, they say. Sometimes it's quick, sometimes it takes a while. Cubans face obstacles every day. So much rain, folks here in Artemisa spent hours cleaning up the mess. Always looking for ways, as they say, to resolver, to figure it out and keep going. Tere Valdez runs this paladar. We talk about the changes in U.S.-Cuba relations. She says she's happy to see what's happening and hopes something good comes out of it. Valdez wants to at least be able to see her youngest daughter more often, who lives in Hialeah. Despite the obstacles, lunch is served at our only stop in the town of Artemisa as our journey continues. Shipping containers is what you see coming into Mariel. The terminal is Cuba's newest economic attraction. They say it will rival any port in America. Its bay is now a playground for school children taking advantage of their summer vacation. The offloading cranes and containers serve as background to life in a small town that's inextricably intertwined with history in South Florida.
Off in the distance, you see a brand new port here off the coast of Mariel, but it was in these very same waters 35 years ago. Thousands of Cubans took off.
In 1980, Local 10 documented the migrant crisis. Fidel Castro, then in charge, allowed Cubans to leave. By the time it was all over, some 125,000 Cubans came to America on mostly chartered boats.
Yo reclamé a 80 de familia.
Roberto Damas is a Cuban exile who decided to rent a boat with hopes he could bring back 80 relatives. Damas, once a political prisoner in Cuba who fled with his family on the Freedom flights in 1970, found himself going back to Cuba. He and several friends split the $45,000 cost to rent a 65-foot boat.
Salimos de Cayo Hueso.
They left Key West and eventually made it to Mariel.
Tuve 11 días allá.
11 días.
11 días pasando hambre y durmiendo en el piso del barco.
11 days waiting with little to eat and sleeping on the floor of the boat.
Eso fue una tortura.
A torturous experience, he says. Remembers having to pay off Cuban officers so he could get his family members on board.
Trajimos 156.
They brought back 156 migrants, but only 3 were family members.
Mi hermano, la señora y mi sobrina.
He brought back his brother, his brother's wife, and their daughter. The rest were strangers. A small percentage, we later learned, had just been released from prisons, some mentally ill. Others, Castro wanted out. Back on our journey in Mariel, where Nancy Limas Diaz remembers families sobbing as relatives left. She recalls seeing hundreds of boats.
La gente, que se le fue la familia.
Felicia Vasquez Hernandez says it was tough to see folks watch as families left. Because we knew, says the 80-year-old, they were not coming back. There was also the fear they may lose their lives at sea. The Florida Straits, unfortunately, is something Cubans know too well. For Damas, it's the only time he has returned to his native land. He never plans to go back. Coming up, one of the most scenic and famous parts of Pinal del Rio. Then, how Wi-Fi spots are sprouting up across the island. And still ahead, we hear from a Cuban dissident and her hopes for the island when Cuba, Coast to Coast, returns. It's not unusual to see this in Pinal del Rio. A man in his horse-drawn carriage with cigar in hand in the province known for growing tobacco. This stogie, he says, he bought at the store, but he doesn't have to go far to find it.
El tabaco bueno es el que compone.
Jose Manuel Junco will tell you, in Pinal del Rio, growing tobacco is a family thing. He's been part of this cooperative 28 years. His father and grandfather all did the same thing. He remembers working the fields as a child. We were born producing tobacco, he says. This is what we do.
Usted ve, estas son clases altas, ¿ve?
The 62-year-old was gracious enough to show us what happens once the leaves are taken from the fields. He took us inside this warehouse, made simply of wood, where the leaves are separated based on where they grew on the plant. You'll see similar-looking structures dotting the landscape as you drive into Pinal del Rio.
El Mañanita, Librepié, Unimedio, Centro Fino, Centro Gordo y Corona.
Y por el tamaño y el color.
He explains the different types of leaves and shows us how they're stored. Think of this warehouse as an oak barrel, which is used to house and age wine.
Esta tiene 5 con sus portales afuera.
The warehouse plays the same role for the tobacco leaf. It houses 3 to 4 tons at a time. But during the season, they can produce up to 46 tons of tobacco.
Aquí ellos están haciendo la selección.
Junco takes us to the other side of the warehouse where something important happens.
Part of the process is separating the leaves. What you see these women doing is choosing the good from the bad.
Everything is done by hand, from the planting of the seeds to the making of the cigar, and nothing is wasted. What doesn't work is used elsewhere on the cigar.
¿Cómo va a afectar eso a su trabajo?
No, en el caso de esto, pienso que no nos afecte.
We asked Junco how the changing U.S.-Cuba relations would affect his work. On the contrary, he says, better relations may help bring materials they now do not have access to, like fertilizers and machines they sometimes have to get from Europe, which are too expensive. It's equipment he would not just use to grow tobacco. On the off-season, these Cuban farmers also grow other vegetables and grains. Junco's family relies on the land. It's how they survive. In Pinal del Rio, Viñales is a must-see. So we stop there. First, at El Mirador.
La boca, la nariz, es un hombre acostado.
An overlook with the views of a lush, beautiful valley.
¿Ves?
¿Y cuál pueblo es ese?
Ese es Viñales. Nosotros vamos a ir para allá.
Felipe, our guide, shows us the town out in the distance while the tourists take pictures and check out the knickknacks they can buy. A picturesque spot, not just for tourists though.
Ok. Recuerda, Vinelli, a la vista bien arriba.
Born in Pinal del Rio,
Mira, abre, mira eso.
now living in Switzerland, but back for a very important time in her life. her quinces.
Oh, sí, mejor, ya.
The rite of passage for teenage girls, and for this one, back to her native country to celebrate.
Abre bien los ojos, muñeca.
Mi mamá quería celebrarme los 15 aquí.
Claudia Cruz says her mother wanted to celebrate her quinces here in Pinal del Rio.
Que eso uno lo tiene de recuerdo, las fotos y la fiesta después con toda la familia.
It's all about the memories, the pictures, and the celebration with family. But she emphasized the pictures and the setting.
Después cuando tenga 40, si yo miro las fotos y me recuerdo cuando tenía 15.
When I turn 40, she says, I want these pictures to remind me of when I was 15. Music is what brought these friends from Denmark to this very spot by way of Havana. They've been learning how to dance back in Denmark.
What do you take away from being here in Cuba?
I think the quietness and the life of Cubans.
Steen Hansen told us he wants to see Cuba as it is now, the product of 50-plus years of revolution and an American embargo. It's tough for Marianne Elsis, who has visited twice before, so has naturally developed ties on the island.
It's so difficult for me to see that they don't have any freedom at all. They're in prison, like in a prison.
For those newfound friends she has made, she wants more freedom of expression, freedom to travel, and the ability to earn decent wages. Down in the valley, you'll find this prehistoric mural, prehistoric only in name. The mural, painted a couple decades ago, pays tribute to Cuba's native people. A rich culture and history that's helping the current residents of the island. In the town of Viñales, it may not seem like it, but its people are always hustling. On the main street, under the shadow of Jose Marti, they wait and wait. Things seem slow at first. Across the way from the main square, you'll notice a couple women who sit and chat. For whatever reason, they don't want to talk to us, but they keep waiting. Walk 2 houses down and you'll find these at a small store, the first sign that tourists come here. You'll have mountain views, says this man, who shows us a laminated flyer with scenic pictures. The attention is on us until the buses show up. Tourists from all over the world get bombarded with offers. This is the center of Viñales. Typically what happens here, the folks who live here come and greet the tourists, hoping to rent out their properties.
This is my home, sir. It's private for you in the center.
This young man knows enough English to get his message across. The home, he tells the French tourists, is available today. He goes on to list all the amenities.
Television, refrigeration, no problem.
AC, private bathroom, and hot water.
Oh, yeah.
And if the Cubans get rejected, which they often do, they go on to the next person. They'll remind you they make a living doing something else. This young man tells us he's a singer, but does this to get by. At the park across the street, Juan Echeverria watches the spectacle. For years, the 83-year-old worked on coffee plantations with cattle, milking cows. Now he's retired, making $8 a month. That is barely enough to eat. Up next, how Cubans are getting illegal access to information and entertainment from abroad. Plus, the hope for Cuba's future from a child of the revolution. Our day gets started in downtown Havana, an ever-changing capital which is still under the shadow of the revolution. The seat of government, long criticized for being oppressive, has built these along La Rampa, busy area in Havana. They're Wi-Fi access points, and you'll find them surrounded by Cubans, typically young ones who cannot get enough. To get connected, they buy cards from the state-owned telecommunications company. This card is worth $2 and you get an hour worth of internet. The problem is, a lot of these folks here in line, especially the young ones, they say it's way too expensive. We found Enrique Santavalla, who uses the card to talk to his mother, who's in Nicaragua. She's on a mission. And talk about a mission. It takes about half an hour cab ride for him to get to this spot.
¿Qué hace usted?
No, trabajo. Soy guía de turismo.
He works as a tour guide, he says, making about $15 a month. The internet cards are a luxury, to say the least. But no matter where we went in Cuba, the obsession was obvious. In every province, typically at the town's central square, we found mostly young people sitting on benches, heads down, focused on screens, no matter the device.
Por lo menos yo que quiero saber de mi mamá tengo que hacerlo.
It's a must for someone like Mayreline Noble, who's constantly trying to stay informed about her mother and stepfather. She showed us some pictures on Facebook. She's able to buy internet cards because of some financial help from her mother. Once a month is all Romel Martinez can afford. A big sacrifice, he says. They only hope access gets better. And that's what this group of Americans want as well.
It's been a great opportunity to see the culture and everything else that it has to offer.
All young and optimistic about a communist country some never thought they'd be able to visit. We met them while we were trying to hail a cab. All visiting the island, they say, because of the changes in travel announced by President Obama earlier this year. Havana is where we first saw it, but what you cannot see is another addiction. It involves technology as well. It's about access. And in order to tell you about it, we couldn't show you his face because it's illegal. He distributes, he says, doesn't produce, and will not tell us how he gets it.
Yo lo compro y lo comercializo como la mitad de los cubanos. 1,000 gente se dedica a esto.
I buy it, resell it, he says, and like me, there are thousands who live off of this. We were there as he was downloading files, copying them in yet another thumb drive.
Es lo que se exhibió la semana pasada que nosotros lo recibimos esta semana.
It's content that aired last week, he says. Part of what Cubans call el paquete, the package, an underground business that has been around a while, in which Cubans somehow access and download hours of television content from abroad. And then they sell it. It thrives here because there's a need. Cubans only have access to several state-owned, state-run TV stations. But El Paquete gives Cubans access to entertainment from all around the world. There's a little bit of everything. Here is the new Jurassic Park movie.
Series, novelas y documentales.
Whether it's movies, documentaries, or novelas, Cubans crave the latest episodes or series. They ask for Spanish news magazine programs like Primer Impacto or Al Rojo Vivo.
Yo te doy 8 gigas de material de lo que tú quieres y te cobro un presupuesto por esto.
He tells us how it works. The customer brings a thumb drive. The price depends on how much memory the thumb drive has. 8 gigs, he charges 10 Cuban pesos or 50 cents. The more memory in the thumb drive, the more content you get. This man has been doing this for 3 years. Like most Cubans, this is a side job. He's making about $32 a month. He spends $2 buying the package.
Me da la posibilidad de 2 libras de arroz y aceite, eso me ayuda a comer por lo menos.
That extra cash allows him to buy 2 pounds of rice and cooking oil, and that helps. But before you start making money, you have to spend money. You have to come up with the cash to buy a computer and external hard drives, which are not cheap. It's not easy, they say, but they figure it out. They make money and keep Cubans entertained. But others use their time in different endeavors. Marta Roque has been fighting for a free Cuba.
Nos dicen mercenarios, terroristas, todo lo que nos quieren decir.
In Cuba, they call her a mercenary, a terrorist. But the outside world knows Marta as a longtime dissident.
Nosotros no tenemos derechos civiles.
We don't have civil rights, says the college professor and economist by trade, who was jailed in 2003 with 74 other men in what they call the Black Spring.
Bueno, esto es una dictadura, un régimen totalitario. Aquí no te dicen nada, aquí te dicen está detenido, está detenido.
This is a dictatorship. A totalitarian regime, she says, where they don't tell you why you're arrested.
A mí me han dado golpes numerosas veces. Me han fracturado los brazos.
They beat me multiple times, one time fracturing my arms.
La gente en Cuba no tiene tiempo para pensar en la libertad.
She says people here don't have time to think about liberty because they're often thinking about how to put food on the table. But Roque remains hopeful.
Want to see more? Head over to local10.com and visit our special section. An interactive map will connect you to Cuba's 15 provinces, full of extra footage, interviews, and slideshows, exclusively on local10.com.
Seguimos, por ahí busca Playa Girón.
Ahí está, playa.
En San Espíritu.
I sit with Felipe
Nos fuimos hacia fuego.
and trace our long journey.
Es que andamos un recorrido por la 14 provincias.
We learned so much about the Cuban people.
Aquí me agarraba, para que no me le fuera.
We learned so much about Felipe. But during our journey, we thought it was just a Cuban thing.
Aviones americanos con insignia cubana.
Felipe, always a couple decibels higher than normal.
Y todos ustedes están presos.
But every word said with conviction and knowledge.
Lo conocido por la bahía de Cochino.
He was our in many places.
Por aquí. Gracias.
So this wasn't just a Cuban thing, it was a Felipe thing. A natural storyteller whose stories were as long as our road trips, but every story was important, including his. Had there been no revolution, he says he'd still be living in Marcané, that town where most people worked in the sugar mill and never made it out of grade school. At 70, he tells me he has always defended and fought for a better world because it's possible.
Ese desarrollo, ese mundo mejor, ver que Cuba llega a tener otras condiciones de vida.
I'm waiting for that better world, he says. He wants to see Cuba reach better living conditions.
Era una meta muy, muy, muy ambiciosa.
He reminds us how ambitious our journey was. A country untapped, inaccessible for decades, but because of the changes in U.S.-Cuba relations, we were there, traveling the entire island.
Solo el amor engendró esa maravilla.
Only love made this happen, he says. Really, Felipe's love for Michelle, his niece. What we haven't told you is that Felipe volunteered to drive us across the entire country, despite his recent cancer diagnosis.
Por ella, yo enfermo, podía hacer ese esfuerzo.
Even sick, he was willing to do it. But the trip was bigger than all of us. It was a story of two enemy nations for the first time, willing to at least talk to each other.
Llevo 60 años luchando.
Because I've been luchando, fighting 60 years to see that better world. Marta Roque, who is Felipe's same age, wants the same thing, but her experience has been different.
Yo quisiera lo mejor para el pueblo de Cuba. Y si puedo al menos aportar un granito de arena a eso, estoy dispuesta a dar mi vida por ello.
If I can at least contribute something, I'm willing to give my life, she says.
Me sería triste morir y no ver eso que por lo que yo lucho tanto.
It'd be sad to die and not see it. Our trip through Cuba took us from one end of the island to the other, but that journey ends now. I hope you got a sense of the realities that Cubans face every day here on the island. And as U.S.-Cuba relations improve, there is hope here of a better future. Thank you for joining us. From Havana, I'm Hat Sovella.